So I know this is a long video, you guys clicking on it, but I guarantee you if you watch to the end of this video, you're going to walk away with at least one or two things that if you're not doing already, they're really going to make a difference in your trail camera game.
Getting those deer to stop in front of the camera so that we can see exactly what deer it is, we can get a good estimation of what age he is, we can catalog him and keep track of him going forward with other pictures that we might get in future years. And it's not about exactly how you set up your camera, it's about what you're doing out in front of that camera to get that deer to stop.
So we wanted to let you guys know, to our first 1,500 subscribers, we're going to be doing a giveaway. Whoever the winner is will have the choice between either a nested backpack, which comes with a set of climbing sticks and a tree stand, or a top-of-the-line Reconyx trail camera. All you have to do to get entered to win is subscribe to our channel and email us a screenshot that shows that you're subscribed. And then whenever we're ready to hold the contest, we'll have a deer head on display and some trail camera pictures of it. And then you guys will get to estimate the score of the deer, and whoever's the closest will get to choose between the nested backpack or the top-of-the-line Reconyx trail camera.
So the first step that we take is we go out in the springtime or just after the green up starts happening, and we'll spray all those camera sites that have scrapes in front of them. We'll spray those scrapes with Roundup and maybe even a residual herbicide to keep those weeds and grasses from growing back up in those scrapes. This is going to keep the deer coming to those scrapes throughout the year. We might even have to do this a few times throughout the summer. If the grasses or weeds start growing in those scrapes, we want to keep them nice and clean and open, and what you end up with is sterilized soil in an area like this. And then when they really start using the scrapes later on, you know, heck, that scrape's already opened up for them. Yeah, so it puts them in front of our cameras more frequently.
So in the midsummer, if you're able to and if your property's suitable, we like to go around all the field edge camera locations and just mow out an area in front of them. It knocks down the big weeds so you're not rubbing up against the grass and leaving that scent when you're going to and from the camera running it.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, obviously you don't want your camera getting false triggers from big weeds that might be out in front of them like this. So by mowing those areas, you're kind of solving that problem too.
Yep.
So I can't remember how many times I've had friends of mine that ask me, you know, how do you get all these daylight pictures of deer, bucks, mature bucks using scrapes, you know? So these techniques that we use, it takes a little extra work manipulating those deer or manipulating the scrapes to get more pictures, but it's very worthwhile because the amount of information that you get goes up drastically when you start doing some of these little things. When it comes to the time of year to set your cameras out, we've always set our cameras out at the beginning of July. Bucks' antlers are developed enough by this point that you can identify what bucks you're looking at from previous years. And so that's when we set ours out. I don't think there's a wrong answer for this. I guess the one advantage to doing it that time of year is, you know, whatever scent you might leave or disturbance you might have on the deer, it's got plenty of time before hunting season for them to get over that. Versus going in October, especially if you got a bunch of cameras to set out, you know, you might pressure those deer right before you plan on hunting them, and that's never good.
So in late August, we like to visit all of our scrape sites, and if they need licking branches, we'll rehang them because sometimes they'll get broken off or they won't have good licking branches to begin with.
Right, and we do this by simply attaching oak limbs with the leaves on them, using zip ties or wire, twist some wire up around them, you know, find a way to hang them in the tree, you know, over that designated scrape that we've already sprayed with our Roundup and herbicides. Works really, really well, and it's pretty cool, it's fun. you're basically manipulating those deer, and over time, those same bucks will come back to those scrapes year after year. It's made some of them bucks really easy to hunt, you know, because they just like hanging around that type of stuff. It's like a community scrape, so to speak. You know, a lot of deer go over and check it out when they're in the area, and and sometimes it's made them a little easier to hunt and kill. When it comes to camera height, again, that's like the timing when you put your cameras out. There's really no wrong way to do it. Hunting public ground, we're coming across a lot of other people's cameras, and I've seen everything from being up in the tree, 10 foot high to right off the ground. Anywhere in between will work, right? There's no real wrong way. I've put cameras high off the ground, specifically when they're close to a stand location. If I have any concern with the deer going around or starting to avoid that area. Otherwise, I pretty much run my cameras at, just above the waist height or right around waist height, wouldn't you say?
Maybe a little higher than waist, but about that.
Yeah, that gives me a good inline sight, a straight on picture of that deer, at head level. That's, I guess, what we're trying to accomplish.
So what are some of the main reasons why deer might avoid the cameras or try to skirt around them? Because we've noticed that before.
Yeah. Well, there's several factors. Leaving scent behind on the camera itself being one of the biggest factors. We have oils throughout our bodies, on our skin, bacteria. These things are even more pronounced a lot of times on our hands. So we're opening, closing the camera, checking the camera, changing the batteries. We're leaving scent, human scent behind. That's a big no-no.
So the first thing we do to minimize leaving scent around our camera site is we wash up real well, especially our hands, with a good scent-free soap.
Yeah, most of the time we'll take a shower. Scent-free soap, good clean hunting clothes, and then hands, wash them real well right before heading out. Some guys I know use rubber gloves. We've used rubber gloves in the past. I'm not a big fan of the rubber gloves because you sweat in them. What we found that's even better than rubber gloves is using some natural vegetation. Our go-to thing is goldenrod. Take that stuff. It's got a really sagey smell to it. Rub it around in your hands real well, and that'll mask that human scent. And once we started doing that, the deer quit going nosing up to our cameras and smelling them. Keep in mind that if you say you're using your pickup truck to access your cameras or check your cameras, you don't want to be getting in and out of your pickup truck, or maybe you just left the burger joint, and you got that smell in your truck, on your steering wheel. You contaminate your hands more frequently than you think during the day. You might work with your vehicle, if you're a mechanic, you're leaving those diesel grease smells. These are all things that you're going to want to avoid because, again, the single most important factor is not keying in those deer to, hey, there's something of danger right here. People have been coming here for some reason. I need to avoid that area. So leaving it smelling like it was before you got there is the goal. That way they keep traveling through the area in their natural habits, and you haven't affected that at all. Gloves is another great way of doing it, especially if you're using a vehicle like a truck or your work truck and you can't keep all of those different components of the work truck clean. Using rubber gloves. We have used them. There are some downsides to rubber gloves. They can get kind of pricey. When you're going through so many of them, if you just have a few cameras, then use a few pairs of gloves a day. Every couple of weeks when you go run your cameras, not a big deal. But like us, we got 24 cameras out. Basically, if you're getting in and out the truck for every one of those cameras, that's 24 pairs of gloves every time I run my cameras. You know, the other downside of rubber gloves, if you've used them, you already know this. Even when it's cooler out, you can still sweat a lot in them. So, you know, if you don't use them, beware of that, especially when it's warmer out. I mean, you can just be rolling sweat out the inside of the glove. Another reason that deer will avoid cameras is, you know, you got them set up at the optimal level, but the deer, when he comes through there, he's walking straight at the camera. So every time he comes through there, he's seeing that camera from a distance, you know, and maybe the sun's hitting the lens just a certain way, or the camera kind of sticks out off the tree. It's just real obvious to the deer. So, you know, think about the way that deer is going to be coming and going through this area, and maybe have that camera set off to the side a little bit so it's not in direct line of sight when the deer is coming through there. What's some other ways the deer avoid, why they avoid cameras?
At the same time, you don't want it right on the trail, because that's just the closer the trail the camera is, the easier the deer's going to see it, the easier he's going to get weary of it or not want to come as close to it.
Yeah, he'll start skirting around it, you know, I don't know what this is, but I don't want to find out. So, yeah, setting them back off the trail a little bit. I mean, obviously you don't want to be 20, 30 yards from where you're trying to catch that deer, but give him a comfortable space, you know, especially if you got your camera in a funnel. He's already maybe feeling a little tight coming through there, like he's squeezed in a way. And here you come and you plop up a camera right here, you know, right on top of him, you know, 2 yards off the trail. He's going to probably quit using that funnel. And that's the last thing you want to do. Funnels are great places to ambush deer, whether you're ambushing them with a camera or you're ambushing them with a bow or a gun. I mean, they're a great place to get a lot of pictures or have a lot of good encounters.
So moving on now, we'll go on to locations, which that's a very important step to setting out your trail cameras, because you want to optimize the amount of pictures and the quality of pictures that you're going to be getting, and that's a very important part of that.
Yeah, some of your camera placement or camera locations, obviously the different locations are going to give you different results. For an example, getting pictures of deer on a scrape versus getting pictures of a deer on a trail. You know, you're going to get a lot more blurry pictures, or maybe you don't get the whole deer in your pictures because he's passing on that trail, versus a deer standing in that scrape for, you know, a couple minutes to 5 or 10 minutes sometimes. So not that we don't use our cameras on trails, we do, but wherever possible, we're gonna also have that camera not only on a trail, but on a scrape that's on a trail. Because more than likely, unless he's on a hot doe or he's being pressured by some other factor like a coyote or people, he's going to stop and check that scrape out if he's passing by it. When those bucks are in those scrapes, they're there for a while, and they're giving you a lot of different angles. You can get to knowing those deer a lot better. You know, you might see some points on that deer that you wouldn't see if you just got them few pictures of him from a side angle. It might determine whether you decide to shoot him or not, you know, or it might help you to age him more correctly.
And even identify the deer when you're out in the field hunting. Maybe it's lower light or something and you're not exactly sure if that's the deer. You might notice something because you got those extra pictures that is the deer.
That's a real good point. That's a really, really good point. So yeah, getting quality pictures is not because we want to frame them on the wall necessarily, although that is pretty cool. It's more for just really getting to be intimate with your deer, or really get to know your deer a lot better, as best as you can, you know, so that you can, just like that, determine what deer that is, even though maybe you only got a glimpse of him coming at you. It might make a difference in just a few seconds whether you get that shot or you don't get that shot with your bow. So it can be really important in that way.
So we've talked a little bit about scrapes today, but we're gonna make another video diving deeper into everything about scrapes, why the deer use them, how they use them, what time of year they use them the most, everything. So just be on the lookout for that video in the future.
So here's something that I just recently kind of noticed, and I'm still trying to get my head completely wrapped around it, but it appears, at least on a few pieces of property that we're hunting. So we hunt public ground primarily. We have in the past hunted some private acres that we had leased, but primarily now we're hunting public ground. It seems like these deer are using the trails. There's some good, heavy, nice trails. They use those trails more at night. And it seems like the reason behind that, best I can tell, is during the day, especially during the rut, those bucks can see, where they want to go a lot better than they can at night. And I'm not 100% sure if I'm right on this or not, but I think I am. And the other thing about during the daytime is, bucks are going to work off their eyesight as to where they're headed next. They'll see maybe a glimpse of a deer in the distance in the woods or on the edge of a field, and quickest way there is in a straight line. So there's not always a trail in that straight line, so they're going to be using the trails a lot less as well during the rut, those 2 or 3 weeks where the bucks are more active than they will be other times of year, when they're not working off of vision. Say they see a glimpse of a deer chasing another deer, that's where they're going. They're not going to necessarily have a trail going there. So rather than going this way on that trail, they're going to cut the distance down by going straight across.
Another location that's top on our list is field edges. We use those a lot because field edges are a lot less intrusive. We don't have to go down in the bedding area or go down in the sanctuary. Spots that are really going to pressure the deer when we have to go in there and run our cameras. Now, we don't only use field edges. We'll put cameras in more intrusive spots, and that's where cell cameras really help out, and we'll get into that a little bit more.
Deer are an animal of the edges, deer really use a lot of field edges. They like to work along field edges. They like to put scent down along field edges and check scrapes. You always see a lot of rubs. Deer just spend a lot of time along field edges. And so we will have some scrapes in camera locations in the woods in places that are easier to access. But I'd say probably 70% of our cameras are going to be on field edges, if the property's conducive to that. We've hunted properties that are all woods. You don't have any field edges. That's a little different setup, and a setup like that, what we're really going to be looking for is some kind of funnel, something to concentrate those deer down, whether it's for a tree stand or a hunting spot or a camera location. Something that's going to force them and pinch them down to where we're going to optimize what we're getting, whether shots, the amount of shots we're getting, or the amount of camera shots, or pictures that we're getting from our cameras. So, field edges are a great place to set up your scrapes. And when you're setting up your scrapes, you can go in there and actually use scrapes that the deer left the previous year, and open those scrapes up in the summertime. Use your Roundup and your chemicals to burn down the grass and vegetation from in the scrape in the summertime, and mow in front of your cameras also in the summertime to get that brush and weeds, kept back so that you get less false triggers. And also the deer like to, come out in the open too, and they'll use those scrapes a little bit more if you got the weeds knocked back a little bit around them.
Another location that we utilize cameras in is fence crossings. Very similar to trails or a funnel. It'll pinch the deer down. They might be crossing a small area where the fence is broken or fallen down. It's a lot easier for them to cross there, obviously.
Yeah, they're going to capitalize on that. They're always going to take the easiest route. Not all of them, but the majority of them do. Yeah, that's another good point. It also gives you the ability to see you know, what deer are coming and going from the neighbors and where at, you know, what areas they're using to flip back and forth from your hunting property to the other properties around you. You know, we'll just talk a little bit more about funnels. There's all kinds of funnels out there. Funnels are, everybody knows, a great place to ambush deer with a bow, a gun, but they're also great places to get a high number, concentration of deer. So the thing about funnels that you want to be careful of is the deer can already kind of feel pressured at times in funnels. They just feel squeezed, especially, for instance, a gate opening. You know, a gate opening where the farm might have pretty good fence everywhere else, but here's this gate that you leave open. It's a tight pinch, you know, deer kind of exposed. They're in the open there, coming through there. They're going to be really weary already about coming through that funnel. If it's a spot, it's a great spot to hunt. You want to be real cautious about putting a camera in that spot if you feel like the deer are already going to be pressured or feel squeezed coming through there already, because now by adding that camera in there, you're putting even more pressure on them.
So moving on to another location is food sources. This might be from the acorn drop in the early fall to bait piles or feeders or even your food plots. And that's great locations for your cameras. We never really use bait piles. It's not legal in our state. So we don't really have much information on that, but I'm sure that you can get a lot of pictures on that.
I've never had the opportunity to bait or even hunt in a state that baiting was allowed, but I'm sure, you know, it'd be a good spot to get a lot of pictures on your camera. In fact, I've got a good friend of mine out in Kansas that runs these gravity feeders, and he gets gobs of pictures of deer on feeders. I don't have a lot to add to that, really. We've never had the ability to use feeders, but we do use a lot of food plots. We plant a lot of food plots, which is similar in some ways.
Now, food plots, they may be a little bit more difficult to really cover fully because the camera can only trigger to a deer so far away, but you're really just going to want to be looking for spots that the deer utilize a lot to get to this food plot, even though you can't fully cover that food plot. Edges of the food plot, like we were talking about, edges of the field, they might work around the edges, or obvious trails that come out of the woods going on your food plot, whatever that case might be.
Another thing that we haven't done in a while on food plots is put a camera a little bit up higher so that it can kind of, you know, be above the vegetation line, and have that camera set on time lapse where it takes a picture every 5-10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you want to set it at. Now it's giving you a look at that food plot periodically throughout the day. That idea is not so conducive to nighttime because your flash, you know, is only going to go so far. But it gives you a good idea of, you know, hey, every 10 minutes I can get a picture of my deer or my food plot to tell me how many deer are using the food plot, what time of day they're using the food plot.
Another thing, some of your newer cell cameras might have a live feature, like where you can set your camera up looking over a food plot, and then at any point in time you can look at it on your phone and you can see any deer that's in your food plot. And that can be really helpful for when...
Yeah, I mean, the further deer away might not be able to tell what deer it is necessarily, but it just gives you a good idea of where they're coming and going, how they're accessing the food plot, and what time of day the majority of them are using it. So another food source that I've gotten a lot of pictures of over the years is certain oak trees. I'm not very knowledgeable when it comes to all different acorns and which ones the deer like and which ones they don't like, or when certain oak trees drop acorns versus the other trees, the other types of trees. But what I do know is acorns can drop pretty early. Like I've witnessed acorns dropping in August, you know, in the Midwest, and that seems early to me, you know, but some trees do drop early. If you're out there running trail cameras in the summertime, early fall, pay attention to those areas that you come across some of those oak trees on your property, because some of them might not produce but every 2 or 3 or 4 years. But when you find those locations, they not only can be good early season spots to bow hunt, they can be excellent spots to put a trail camera. You might only set one there every 2 or 3 years when that tree produces fruit, but when it does, it can be nonstop. I mean, 24/7, there's deer underneath those trees when they're dropping acorns, especially those early trees.
So now moving into how often you check your cameras. So excluding the rut, we're mainly running our cameras every 2 weeks. And during the rut, we try to run them more frequently, but more when we're going in to hunt a spot, so that we're not going into the areas too much during the rut and pressuring those deer. But we still want to be able to get those pictures as quick as possible, because during the rut, deer can show up at any time. And if you don't know he's there, he might be gone before you get those pictures if you wait that 2 weeks, and the rut might be over. So if you can get in there and run your cameras when you're hunting, when you're going into a spot, that really helps if you're passing by the cameras, of course.
That's where these cell cameras come in. Speaking of cell cameras, that's something that we haven't gotten into yet, but we're planning on investing in some cell cameras for this upcoming season. We'll probably do a video on that later on and kind of go over some of the results. The whole concept is great, not having to go in as frequently to run them. So discussing the best time of day or night best suited to run your trail cameras, where you're going to have the least impact on your deer. I'm going to use this 240 acre farm that we had leased. I think we had it leased for 17 years. We really got to know the farm really intimately. But it was obvious in the first few years that the farm was primarily a bedding type of farm. Like, it had a lot of brush, thick brush, bedding area. There was some food source on the property as well, but the deer on that property had a tendency of leaving at night. They would go to more destination food sources. Some of the deer would remain on the property, but the majority of them would leave. So we go check our cameras at night, like in the middle of the night, using an electric buggy, which was just another added form of stealthiness, lowering that pressure while checking our cameras.
And on the flip side of that, your farm might be that destination farm where the deer are going at night to feed. So you might want to run your cameras in the middle of the day. And that's kind of going to be up to you after you learn that farm to determine, because all the farms are going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, this is an important part of running your trail cameras and getting the best results. One of those things that you want to avoid is overpressuring your deer.
Yeah.
So checking your cameras at the optimal time is pretty important.
Another important consideration is choosing the best weather conditions when you go out to check your cameras. We watch the weather forecast closely and try to choose some times where we might have some high winds coming through, or a weather system where we can go check them cameras right before the rain. And that rain will just help dissipate some of the scent that we may have left behind. And those occasional snowstorms that you might have are another great time to go run your cameras. Another thing that might not seem like a very big deal, but makes a huge difference for us, is having a little fanny pack and keeping yourself organized. We've got a little card case in here. It keeps the cards all organized and keeps them from getting damaged in our pockets. And then another thing that we keep in here, which is really helpful, is a little brush. This is just a Leopold scope cleaning brush, but it's really awesome because if you guys know, if you run cameras very often at all, the spiders and bugs like to leave smudges on the lens or build spider webs on the lens. And this is really handy for just brushing off the camera lens. And then if you have padlocks on your cameras, having your keys in one spot is really handy, because if you go out there and you forget your keys, that could be really annoying. And having them all in one spot so you never forget them and you never lose them could save you a lot of time. And all these things combined is going to save you a lot of time, so you're not spending as much time in front of that camera, lingering around, leaving more and more scent the more you're in front of that camera. It really does help.
Yeah, so sometimes you might get home from work and say, man, I got off early today. I'm going to go check my cameras. Now you don't have to go searching through all your hunting gear to find your keys. Make sure you get some batteries, bring with you. Where's my SD cards? You know, heck, you can spend an hour searching for all that junk, and now it's too late to go run your cameras. Whereas if you keep it all organized, everything's in this one little spot, boom, I can be out there, you know, a lot quicker when I do get that opportunity to go check my cameras.
So I always enjoy hearing stories about deer hunts and all. So why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers about these antlers sitting right here?
Yeah, so these antlers, we had the fortunate pleasure of picking up. These probably look like a matching set, but they're not a matching set. They're off the same animal, but they're from 2 consecutive years, this being when he was 4 and this is when he was 5. Neighbors actually killed this buck when he was 6, and he didn't change very much at all. We thought this deer was going to do something when he was at 3 years old, but he just never got to be a high scoring deer. One of the neat things about this deer is he always had a G2 that was split, but on these 2 years it switched sides. So when he was 4, it was on his left antler, and then when he was 5, the split G2 was on his right side. I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, I've seen that before in other deer, but we had a lot of history with this deer, and having that split jump from side to side was pretty cool, I thought. The reason we wanted to highlight this set of antlers is not because he's the biggest or anything like that. It's because when he was 5 years old and he had this antler, or this set of antlers here on his head, which I've only got one of each side from the 2 years, 4 years old, 5 years old. But when he was carrying this antler, I actually saw him in a matter of a week. I saw him coming and going off of the neighbor's farm onto our farm we were hunting 5 different times. And not one of those times did he pass in front of one of our cameras. And to give you a little bit more of a backstory on it, you know, the perimeter of the property that we were hunting, we really had blanketed with cameras. It was 240 acres and we had 24 cameras on it. Now the farm hunted bigger than 240 acres because it had a lot of edge to it. So it hunted more like 300 or 400 acres. But regardless, we had a lot of cameras around the perimeter of the farm, just for the simple fact that those areas were easy to access. And it also gave us a lot of information on the coming and goings of the deer, how they were using our property, how much time they were spending on us versus how much time they were spending on the neighbors. So yeah, seeing this deer come off of the neighbors or go onto the neighbors on 5 different occasions in the time frame of a week and not pass in front of one of our cameras, at first glance you might think, well, maybe he knows where all your cameras are. But that wasn't the case at all. He would come onto our food plot, feed in front of cameras on the food plot. We were getting pictures of him on the food plot. We just weren't getting pictures of him where he was coming across the property line. And we had it blanketed. For whatever reason, you know, I think the bottom line is it's just hard to get pictures of everything that's going on. I don't care how well you think you got it blanketed. There are going to be places where the deer are going to come across or pass where you're not going to have a camera. There's just too many areas that they can pass. So you're never going to get everything on your cameras. I used to like to joke about it, and I got so many cameras on that property that I even know when the squirrels fart out there, you know. If a mouse farts, I know about it. That's not the case at all. There's just too many areas to cover, and heck, a deer could cut across your property and never pass in front of a camera. If you're not there to see it, you're not going to know he was ever there. It's just something that I had to learn the hard way. I thought, man, we blanket that property with cameras, we're going to know everything that happens there. And for the most part, you know a lot of what's going on, but you don't know everything that's going on that property.
Especially on those deer that aren't a resident deer to your property. They might live on another farm or a couple farms over. They're just passing through, either looking for a doe or they're on a doe and just passing through quick, and you may never see them again. And they might not even pass in front of your cameras. So
Yeah, doesn't mean they're not there.
nope.
Yeah. You get most of what's there, but you don't get it all. So don't have the misconception. I guess this is the point I want to get across. Don't have the misconception that you don't have a good deer to hunt because you're not getting him on camera. I've made that mistake and later found out that there was a 200-inch deer on the neighboring farm. I don't know that he was ever on me, but I was moping and crying and whining about not having a big deer to hunt. And there was a 200-inch deer that the neighbor had just right across the property line. So don't rely solely on your cameras. They're a valuable tool, but there's a lot of misconceptions of what they actually offer to us as hunters. They don't tell the whole story. And I think we're all guilty of relying too much on gadgets and these cameras, things like that. I mean, when you're out there hunting, unless you're taking a nap on the stand, you see everything. You can't see over and beyond that tree line or beyond that hill, but everything in your wheelhouse might be 300 or 400 yards of a cornfield that you can cover. You see everything. That information is invaluable. You can't get that information with a camera like you can, when you're actually out there. So I know it's easy to get discouraged because you don't have a big deer on camera, but one, he could show up tomorrow, or he could already be there, and you just haven't got a picture of him yet. Look at Survivor, that deer, what he was like 186 or whatever. He was there on the farm, and actually we got him killed, and then going back and running the cameras, we only had a couple glimpses of pictures of that deer. And he had been there for several days because we hunted him hard for several days, and we were catching glimpses of him and seeing him. But then going back, we ran all the cameras, and he just wasn't on the cameras. He was passing or hanging out in areas that we didn't have a camera in, And the other thing is, he was on a doe the whole time he was here, or on multiple does, so he wasn't spending time in front of those scrapes like he would have been other times of the year. So we didn't have pictures of him, or we had only a couple glimpses of him, and he was there. So that's another good example. I didn't think about that, but.
All right, so that wraps it up for this video. We really hope that you guys can implement some of these tactics when you're out there running your trail cameras, because we know it's really going to make a huge difference. If you can just add them little tactics in, it really does make a difference.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for all of our future videos.